אתחיל רק בבקשת סליחה שאני מדבר מרצה באנגלית, אבל אין לי השליטה בעברית שדרוש לנושא ואני מבקש סליחה. Our general topic is the sanctity of life during the Shoah. I would like to focus on the theological religious background of this value, and I would call my own presentation the infinite value of life. The Kedushat HaChaim, the sanctity and the upholding of life at all costs by the doctors and nurses, as we heard in this very moving presentation, grows out of a more general fundamental principle of the Jewish religion. If I had to summarize it, I would say that Judaism is the religion of life. That is to say, life, its importance, its special qualities, is simply the highest value in the tradition. And the realm of God, the house of God, for example, the Beit HaMikdash, or the Mishkan, is a house that is completely life. One was not allowed to bring a corpse into it, or even for that matter, a person who had been exposed to a corpse had to first go through a rebirth ritual before they could enter the house of life, because God is completely the source of life and on the side of life. And the task, not only of doctors, but of people, is to turn the whole world into the realm of God, that is to say, the realm of life. So it starts with God literally, which according to Jewish tradition is who is the ground of all existence, Makor HaChaim, the source of life, and as described in our ritual, Elohim Chayim, that is to say, the God who is the God of pure life. And as we say in the Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur liturgy, Melech Chafetz B'Chayim, the ruler of the world who lusts, who desires life above everything. And if we read the creation story as it's told in the first chapter of Bereshit, Genesis, we are told what is God's response to the emergence of life. As creation grows, if you follow the pattern, at first there is no life, but life emerges. And interestingly enough, each time life emerges at a higher level, God's response is twofold but similar. First, Vayavarech otam, God blesses this life, and secondly says, give me more, pru uravu. Life is such a delight to God that God wants more of it. And so, of course, that is in fact the theme or the sub-theme of creation story itself. Yeshayahu, chapter 45:18 says as follows. This is the word of God. Ko amar Hashem, borei hashamayim hu Elokim. This is the word. Yotzer ha'aretz v'oseha, the one who created the earth, the planet that we live on. Lo tohu v'ra, l'shevet yitzara. It was created not to be empty and void. And that's how existence starts, without life, empty and void. L'shevet yitzara, it was created to be settled, that is to say, to be full of life. So the Talmud derives from this principle that the task of human beings is to fill the world with life. It's also to create a world which upholds, sustains life in all its dignity, but to fill that world with life. And therefore, for example, the Talmud says that whereas one can fulfill the mitzvah of pruravut, to be fruitful and multiply, by having two children, since we are committed or asked by God to fill the world with life, to fill it with life, the obligation or the mitzvah of having children goes beyond 2 to 3, 4, or whatever. In other words, it's a statement of a call to each human being to feel responsible to assure the future of life, the continuity of life, and the test of a full life is that I leave behind more life in the world that I have left behind than I myself or I and my partner represent. So this human responsibility to fill the world with life is the essential approach of humans to the existence of life in the world. Thus, in seeing other forms of life, less developed than human, one is to see them as having value. So if you look at the scale of life from the very beginning of existence, as it develops, it has a greater value and a greater worth, which one is supposed to recognize and express in treatment. Thus, for example, inorganic or the lowest forms of life are covered by the commandment Bal Tashchit, not to waste them, because to waste or to use without any purpose any form of quality of material, let alone life itself, is to say it has no worth. So the first commandment is simply to take it seriously enough not to waste it. Now, if you move up the scale of life and one comes to sentient beings, the mitzvah of Tsar Bal Chaim kicks in, that it's not just enough not to waste them, but one must treat them with the respect, kindness, and care that avoids causing pain to them that could be avoided. And that's the mitzvah of Tsar Bal Chaim, not to inflict suffering on living things. And as one moves up the human scale to the ultimate, thus far the most important developed form of life, thus far, the human being, here one crosses the threshold and reaches the highest level of value and dignity that we're supposed to both recognize and honor. The human being is described in the first chapter of Bereshit as Tselem Elokim, Vayivra Elokim Adam B'Tselmo, B'Tselem Elokim Bara Oto. This is a form of life so highly developed that it is God-like, and therefore it deserves the treatment, the respect, and the special care that one does for the most sacred and important value. There's a classic Mishnah in Sanhedrin 37a, which tries to communicate what is the implication, what is the intrinsic dignity that is implicit in the statement that every human being, yes, the person next to you and behind you, is Tselem Elokim, is an image of God. And the Mishnah there says, why does the Torah tell us the whole story? Lama livra Adam Yechidi. Why is this story of Adam? It's not the literal story of how humans evolved and developed. So why does the Torah tell us this narrative of God creating Adam single, unique? And the Talmud concludes that there are three fundamental dignities implicit in the life, in the quality of life that humans represent. One is, of course, you all recall this is perhaps the most famous line in rabbinic literature, Kol HaMekayim Nefesh Achat Ki'ilu Kiyam Olam Malei. There are many interpretations of this principle, of this concept. Why is one life equal to a whole world? But my interpretation, quite simply, is what it's trying to tell us is that one human being is of infinite value. In fact, every human being is of infinite value. So if you save one life, you've saved an infinity, and that's equivalent if you save the whole world of 8 billion, whatever the current number is of human beings, they also have saved an infinity. In short, what does it mean to say that every human being is born with the dignity of infinite value? Well, it means, for one, that your life, my life, anyone's life, is more valuable than any amount of money. So the implication of that in the tradition means that nobody should die for lack of money, that no one should lack medical treatment because they can't afford it, that no one can buy the right to kill. Jewish religious law in ancient Mesopotamia is the one code that says you cannot pay ransom for killing somebody, even if you are of a superior class, as was established in those days, because life is more valuable than any amount of money. And no amount of money is too much to save your life, to spend, to save your life. No amount of money is too much to increase the quality of your life. Where I came from in America before one made Aliyah, tuition in the Ivy Leagues runs like $50,000, $60,000 a year. And if you think about it, $50,000, $60,000 a year, how much mental improvement is there in a year of higher education? 2%, 3%? Well, that's a statement that improving the quality of your life by 2% is worth at least $60,000. So it gives you a sense of what I was trying to say when we say each life is of infinite value. The answer is it's a bargain, because that is the responsibility, and that is a test of a good society, that money is never short or an obstacle to needed medical or human needs. The second dignity of every Tzelem Elokim, says the Mishnah, is that every human being, every image of God is equal to every other image of God. It's idolatry that claims that there is a particularly unique, special picture of God. If God is Zeus, or if God is Mars, a young warrior, or if God is Astarte or Venus, a beautiful woman, that's a claim that that image of God is superior, is closer to the truth of the existence of the divine than a different example. But that's the whole point of Jewish tradition. That's an idol, to claim that any particular fixed version of God is somehow superior. God is not white. God is not colored. God is not a male. God is not a female. Each image of God, by definition, is a metaphor, is a partial, is an accurate picture of the presence of God in our midst, but all are equal to each other. And the third dignity, which every image of God is born with, not based on color, not based on religion, not based on nationality, not based on superior lineage, is of course uniqueness. In the words of the Mishnah, when a human being creates a coin or a stamp and they come from one mold, each one is identical. But when this is the praise and the greatness of God, that God created all human beings from one Adam and Eve, whatever version of that you want to study, and yet each one is different. You can tell it's an image of God because it is unique. And if you think that all Jews are, you name it, cunning, crafty, or even smart, that's a stereotype. It's a denial of the uniqueness of the individual. If you think all women look the same in the dark, if you think that all Arabs are terrorists, you can pick your particular version. But the essence of the seeing the other as the image of God is to recognize the uniqueness. No two human beings are the same. Not even identical twins are identical. If you were their mother, you would have noticed that the one on the left has a slight scar behind her left ear. And so the recognition, when I see another human being next to me and I recognize them as God, the fundamental recognition that should come at me immediately. It's not a commandment, it's a recognition, instinctive, personal, is to recognize the infinite value, the equality, the uniqueness of the other person. And that's why I have to treat their life with such consideration. In the Yerushalmi, in Masechet Nedarim, there is a machloket. What is the klal gadol, the fundamental principle of the whole Torah? And what, if you look at the Talmudic explanation, the klal gadol means, is there an underlying fundamental principle from which you can derive all the other mitzvot, all the other prohibitions, all the other commandments? The answer to that is it's a machloket. That's a standard answer to the Talmud when you ask a question, is the two rabbis disagree. But what is the machloket? Rabbi Akiva says the fundamental principle of the Torah is v'ahavta re'echa kamocha. If you understand what it means to love your fellow human being as yourself, you would naturally, instinctively fulfill all the commandments of the Torah. Ben Azai says, however, there's an even more fundamental principle. If you understood that every human being is an image of God, then you would understand instinctively correctly how to keep both the positive commandments and the negative commandments. So let me take a moment to clarify what that really means, that the image of God is the fundamental principle of Jewish ethics or of Jewish religion. What it means to say is that every mitzvah comes down to the question of choosing life, respecting life, upholding life, increasing the quality and the dignity of life. And that, of course, is, as we heard in the beautiful previous presentation, the commandment of ואחת b'chayim. So every mitzvah, you can pick a ritual, pick an ethical mitzvah, pick a prohibition. They are all attempts to realize and to guide you as to how do you show the respect for the infinite value, the equality, the uniqueness of the person. Or to put it another way, how do you maximize life in treating other people or in seeing other people or in doing your own work? Rambam, in his Guide to the Perplexed, makes the point even sharper. He said, if you look at that full quote, Moshe starts by saying, Ra'ei natati lefanecha hayom, et hachayim v'et hatov, et hamavet v'et hara. I put before you today life and good, death and evil, uvacharta b'chayim. Says Maimonides, what he's really trying to tell us is that chayim and tov are in apposition. They are in this identical, they're the same term. And mavet and ra are the same term. Death and evil are the same term. In every mitzvah and every good deed, there's an element of choice of life. And in every evil act, there is an element of a choice of death or degradation of life or lowering the quality or polluting life. And so says Rambam, if so, the call to B'charta B'chayim means you should look at every behavior in your life, stop and ask yourself, not simply to do it, but how do I maximize it to maximize the choice of life and minimize the choice of death? So let me give a ritual example and an ethical example. My ritual example is kashrut. Kashrut is sort of seen simply as a kind of a ritual commandment, but if you look at it more closely, it's an attempt to guide us in the act of eating to make sure that it's a choice of maximum life. Well, what does that mean? Well, it starts with the fact, eating, if you don't eat, you're going to die. So obviously eating is a choice of life. But now kashrut goes one step further and says, but can you maximize the life by what you eat? Well, how does that mean? Well, it starts with the fact that the ideal of the Torah is vegetarianism. In the Garden of Eden, and again in the Messianic age, we'll all be vegetarians. In fact, according to Yeshayahu, the lions and the other predator animals will become vegetarians also. Why? Because your life should not live by the death of another living, growing organism. So in the ideal world, we'd all be vegetarians. Now the Torah says that is the goal. And the Messianic world, when we make the world perfect, we'll all be vegetarians. But in the short run, we do allow meat, partly because we're living in an unredeemed world, and there are many advantages to animal protein and many needs for it. But if so, you should still maximize life. How do you do that? Well, one is by minimizing the number of animals you're allowed to eat. There are a very limited number of species that are permitted to be eating. All the others are prohibited meat. And if you look at the permitted species, they're all vegetarian. You are what you eat. And if you eat predators, you're more likely to be a predator. So the answer is the limited number of species that are allowed are all vegetarian themselves. Secondly, when you kill the animal, shechita is a form of swift, instant, painless death with the idea that you're maximizing life, but you're minimizing death and suffering for the animal as well as for the people involved. And of course, one can go on and on. For example, again, the higher the form of life, the more the restrictions. Thus, when you want to eat fish, the only restriction is species, fins and scales. If you want to eat a higher bird, the restriction includes shchita, slaughtering it painlessly. And if you want to eat an animal, you have restrictions of species, shchita, and of course, milk and meat together. Because milk represents life, the mother's milk, the source of life, and meat represents death, and therefore you have to minimize, at least admit that the meat and milk should not be together, and that your meat is in contradiction to the commitment of milk. Excuse me. So the point is, again, it may be a ritual, but all rituals, if I had time and I don't, I would go through all the rituals. One would say it's the same basic principle. How do you maximize the quality of life? How do you minimize the quality of death? And of course, well, the same would apply to all ethical principles. What is the meaning of tzedakah? Tzedakah is not charity, it is taking care of somebody in need, but it's righteousness, it's law, it's commandment. Why? Because that person is infinitely valuable and equal to me. And therefore I should not be well fed while they starve. I should not be sheltered while they are homeless. So tzedakah, again, is simply the attempt to maximize the dignity of the fellow human being and a recognition of the supremacy of life. Finally, the broadest understanding of this is how each individual act of life, or to put it very simply, the call of the human being is to live on the side of life. And I have to stop and look. The next word I say, will it be a word of life or of degradation? The next act of love that I perform, will it be an act of respect for the other or an act of mastery or harassment of the other person? The next, you name it, the next time I drive, will I drive a fossil fuel car with a large carbon footprint? Or will I drive an electric vehicle that maybe reduces the carbon footprint of life? One could go on and on. The broader and final principle that I want to make, of course, is the general conception of the tradition that we are partners with God in Tikkun Olam. In the prophetic vision of Messianism, of the Jewish dream of turning this planet into a Gan Eden, into a paradise. Excuse me, one has the Jewish vision and dream of the triumph of life in this world. We are not only supposed to live on the side of life, but as a collective, we're supposed to upgrade the world so it fully sustains life, or to put it more correctly, we overcome all the enemies of life. What are the enemies of life that we dream of overcoming? Poverty. The Navi Yeshayahu speaks of the day when wealth will flow like a stream, because poverty is not only a matter of poverty, it degrades the quality of life, it limits the opportunities of the poor. We have to overcome hunger, which again undercuts and destroys the image of God. We have to overcome inequality and oppression. In the Messianic age, says Yeshayahu, that the dalim, that the poor, that the helpless will receive a shafat b'tzedek, will receive equal justice with the wealthy and the powerful, because we'll overcome hunger, we'll overcome inequality and oppression, we'll overcome war. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. And perhaps most relevant in a medical school, we'll overcome sickness. That's part of the dream of perfecting this world. Thus, in the words of Yeshayahu, "Az tipakachna einei ivrim," the eyes of the blind will be open. "Az tipakachna einei ivrim," the aznei chershim tipatachna, and those who are deaf will hear again. And he goes on, Oz Yaron, those who are limp will dance, those who are handicapped will be able to flourish. In short, that is part of the task of the human race, and the doctors have a particularly important role in this, to be the cutting edge of overcoming sickness, because sickness is the enemy of human dignity and value and uniqueness. What is Alzheimer but the loss of memory? Is the loss of uniqueness. The ultimate statement then of the supremacy of life, of course, is the principle in the tradition of pikuach nefesh. In the end of the 613 commandments listed in the tradition, 610 are overruled if you need to save a life, because the mitzvot exist to save a life and to support it, not to be at the cost of v'chai behem, as you heard, saw the projection. V'chai behem means v'lo sheyomus behem. All the mitzvot are meant to help us to live by and to strengthen life, and therefore one overrides them if that's what's needed in order to save life. Now, the contrast of all that I've tried to explain in the tradition, of course, is the Nazi experience, which we saw in the portrait of the Refuah during the Shoah. One might say Nazism and the final solution of the Jewish problem was an attempt, as it were, I see it, as an all-out assault of death on life. If I was going to offer a theological interpretation of Nazism, I would say it is idolatry. The main claim, one of the main methods of Nazism, was the Führer, was the absolute authority of the leader. In other words, it was a claim that a human being is the ultimate authority, that a human being decides who shall live and who shall die, which is what Joseph Mengele said when he was asked, what is he doing making the selection on the ramp at Auschwitz? So the claim that human beings are the ultimate authority is in direct contradiction with the Jewish traditional claim that there is a God not controlled by humans, whose authority is independent and to whom we are accountable. And therefore, anyone who seeks to set up a human power authority as absolute must, as it were, eliminate God. And if the next thing you can do to do that, of course, is to eliminate the people who represent the God's presence in the universe, and hence the Nazi decision to wipe out every Jew, as it were, to establish the ultimate authority of human and not of God. And again, I want to make clear, it wasn't just that they sought to kill the Jews. There was a fundamental theological drive here to undermine the claims of life, the value of life, the quality of life. One of the most important activities that Nazis did was to reduce the cost of killing Jews, or if you will, to raise the profit of this disseminating of destroying their lives. And so, for example, they had an accounting department that did a study. When you took Jews to Auschwitz, of course, 80–90% were gassed on the spot, but 10–15% sometimes were kept for labor. So someone did an accounting projection. How do you maximize the profit of working the prisoners to death? It's obvious what we're talking about, because as they are worked to death, they get weaker, their output drops. So the question was, how long should you keep them alive, or how quickly should you work them to death in order to maximize the profit? And the conclusion was roughly 9 months. If you kill them too early, you lose the labor value. If you kill them too late, you're keeping them alive at a cost which is not ideal. And so the conclusion was 9 months. Of course, in the actual fact, it was shorter and lesser, but that was a conscious projection, rejecting the Jewish claim of infinite value of life. It was a projection that human life is worth profitable commodity judgment and treatment. And that went on in many different ways. The other example being, of course, to reduce the price of killing. When they first started, they shot, it was Holocaust by bullets. But then again, the accountants came back and pointed out that bullets are expensive. And so the shift to gas was in part a psychological judgment. Some soldiers were bothered by the shooting, and this way they would not have to see what they're doing in killing. But equally, and not an important factor, was the judgment. It's cheaper. You can kill more people for much less cost. And as they worked on bringing down the cost, the climax of the Shoah in 1944, when Hungarian Jewry was wiped out and 10,000 Jews a day were gassed at Auschwitz, someone came up with the idea of cutting the gas supply in half. What does that mean, to cut the gas supply in half? Well, the answer is, instead of asphyxiating, dying in agony, losing control of their sphincters, choking for 20, 30 minutes, up to 10, 15 minutes, you could extend it. It would take 20 to 30 minutes, but that way you saved half the price of the gas. And at the final moment of this logic, according to the testimony of Esma Gusko, who was a Polish woman guard at Auschwitz, they were given the order at the peak, when they were having trouble finishing off Hungarian Jewry, they were given the order to simply dump the children alive into the burning pits without putting them in the gas chambers first. And when the prosecutor asked her, why did they do this? She said, well, we had two different instructions. Some told us it was because there wasn't enough room in the gas chambers, and some guards told us because they wanted to economize on gas. So when I saw that passage, I decided to research what did it cost them to gas a child at Auschwitz that they would want to economize on the gas. And the answer is that the price of gas was 5 marks a kilogram in 1944. And by cutting the supply in half, they could kill about 1,500 people in 5.5 kilograms of gas, or 27.5 marks for 1,500 people, which comes out to roughly 45/100ths of a penny. That's 1.7 agorot per person. But in 1944, the Nazi denial of the infinite value of life said that a Jewish life is worth 1.7 agorot to kill, but a Jewish child's life isn't worth 1.7 agorot to put them out of their misery before you kill them. So there could be no more stark contradiction between our traditional claim that human life, all of life is the highest value, but human life is the highest of infinite value, and the Nazi claim that human life is worth nothing. And it's no accident that after the Shoah, the major Jewish response, a response echoed by the rest of the world, was the recognition that powerlessness is unacceptable. We're living in a world in which evil has developed such capacity for killing that the only thing that can uphold and protect life is to take power. So the Jewish people took power by creating the state of Israel, a power to protect life. And I must say, women's liberation, gay liberation, colored anti-imperial liberation, all of these movements have been post-war because there was a universal recognition that living in a world in which such evil has such power, that the only thing that can uphold the protection of life is that vulnerable populations be strong enough to protect themselves. So our choice to take power for life, which represented the state of Israel, has also been the big story of medicine since World War II. Medicine has undertaken and achieved levels of power, of discovery of fundamental laws, DNA, a fundamental exploration of creation of new medicines that literally have taken power for life. The challenge to medicine, as it is to us as a political entity, is to develop an ethic of power that truly understands the value of life and make sure that in using our power, we do not abuse it or cheapen the life of others. That's an unfinished job, but the lesson of the Shoah and the lesson of the heroism of our people in the Shoah and the lesson of our tradition is the guiding light that challenges us to develop our understanding of how, using our power, we can make a world in which life wins out over its enemies.